Hello and welcome to Apptech America's Oracle EBS Financials Functional Training. My name is Bob and I'm the lead senior consultant for Apptech America. And I have with me Victor, who is also a senior consultant. And today we are covering General Ledger Lesson 16. Victor, can you please walk us through?
Hello everyone, and thank you, Bob, for your introduction. Welcome to the 16th lesson in this Oracle Financials Functional Training series. Today, I would like us to look at the topic of mass allocation. So let's get right to it. So what is mass allocation? This is a feature that is provided by Oracle that is used to distribute costs or revenues to different entities, such as departments or cost centers, or it could be projects or products for revenue centers. And these costs or revenues are distributed from a central pool to these different entities using a certain formula. Okay. So now, the work that this mass allocation feature does can actually be done manually, as we are going to see, because what it does is it distributes these costs or revenues by generating journals that distribute those expenses or revenues from that central pool. And we're going to see how that occurs. So the use of the mass allocation feature is to automate this process of distributing the costs or expenses and or revenues. So that work that mass allocation feature does can actually be done manually by entering journals. However, if the client does this repeatedly or has entries such as this that come repeatedly, maybe like at the end of every month, you can tell them that this is a feature that they can use to automate that process. Now, we are going to use an example so that we can have a clearer understanding of what this feature, how this feature works, because you need to know how it works so that when you offer it to the client, if they have the need, you can be able to do it. But also remember that this is not a fundamental, it's not like a required setup for General Ledger. It's not something that you have to implement. Rather, it is just a feature that you can tell the client that can make their work easier. So now let's look at this example so that we can have a clearer understanding of mass allocation. So now assume for the company that we are using, which is Maskani, in our example, because they are a good company, they buy meals for their employees. Let's assume that they buy employees breakfast every day, every morning. So now at the end of every month, the catering company that maybe they have contracted for this work to supply their meals sends them an invoice for the total cost of the breakfast. Now, maybe somebody who is entering or receiving the invoice and entering the invoice using accounts payables will enter a journal such as this one. It will expense the main office, which you're going to say is department 00, which we have in our setup as default. Let's say it's charged to that particular department, and a credit of cash is also done against that department. So that is the entry that that person will enter. However, since they want to distribute this expense to the various departments that we have, that is where they can do those entries manually, or they can use the mass allocation feature to automatically generate journals that distribute this cost. So now, if you were to allocate this expense to this department, how would you do it? Like, what is the basis that you would use to distribute these costs or revenues, if they are revenues, to these departments? You'd have to use a certain basis. So you can do, in our case, you can use the number of employees per department, so that you can allocate the costs the right way. If it is something else, maybe you can use something like rent. You can use the size of the office that the department uses, or the sitting space that they use. So you have to use a certain formula. So in our case here, we are going to use the number of employees in each department. And remember, this is where the start journals that we studied in the previous lesson come in. This is how you capture the number of employees in every department, and that is how you capture that information. So this is the basis that we are going to use to reallocate this cost of breakfast to each department, and see how each department like how much each department spends for breakfast. So if the amount is $900, so for example, how would we do it even without thinking about Oracle? Thinking of it in a mathematical way, you would first take the $900 and you would divide by the total number of employees employed by the company in all departments, which is 90. Okay, so 40 plus 30 plus 20 gives us 90. So you divide 900 by 90, but now that is the cost for a single employee. So to find for each department, you multiply by the number of people in that department. So 900 divided by 90, get it is 10. So to get for HR and payroll, you multiply by 40, you get that what they use is 400. To get for operations, you multiply 10 times 30, you get 300. And to find for sales and marketing, you multiply 10 by 20 to get 200. So that is the same way the mass allocation calculates these amounts and allocates them to each department. And we are going to see the technical terms for all those operations. So these are the journals which would be generated by that process, right? So now remember, at the top here, we debited an expense account for meals. Maybe it would be account like 5,000 or 5,001, and then we credited cash account against the main office, which is 00. Now we want to distribute this expense here to each department. So what do we do? We credit that amount from this expense for the main office, and then we debit the expense account for every department. So here we have credited 400 from here. We have reduced it by 400. That is a credit, and then we debit 400 against department 20, which is HR and payroll. Then we credit again another 300 from this expense here for 900, and then we debit against this expense account for the operations department, which is department 10. And then for the final one, we debit 200. We credit 200 from here, and then we debit against department 30, which is the sales and marketing, and for their respective amounts. So at the end of the day, this is what has happened, okay? The expense has been reallocated to each department using headcount as the basis for their respective amounts. And these are the allocation journals that will be generated. The net result is this here, okay? You credited 900 from here, the expense account, so the sum of the activity is 0 because the original entry was a debit of 900 expense, but then you credited that 900 again, and then you reallocated it to the departments, which is debit in their expense accounts and against each department. Again, this is an illustration of the net result. So the original expense debit will cancel using with this credit amount, okay, and the net result will be now referring back to this cash account here, okay. So the complete final result will be expenses debited to each department using the head count here, and a credit of cash which is credited against the main office, because all the departments sit together in one main office. So that is what the mass allocation feature would do in the example that we are using, okay. However, that is not the only thing that could happen, again, as I said. So it depends on what segment you are distributing these expenses in. So if you are distributing expenses among like projects, if that is what your chart of the chart of account has, then you do the same but using the project segment. So it depends on what is the cost center or what is the revenue center that you want to do the allocation in. So let us take a small break and we will continue with this topic of mass allocation. Now, there is something that I want to just clarify. This is a net result. It's a conceptual net result of the of the end product when you run the mass allocation program. These are actual journal entries that will be produced when you use this mass allocation feature. Okay, but this here, along with this, are just the conceptual end results. So you can see the what like the end balances or the end journal lines are. No, let's not say balances. let's say the end result, when you run the mass allocation feature and generate the journals, these are the end results. However, the actual journal entries that can be entered, that are produced, are this one that will come from maybe accounts payables, or if you don't have accounts payables module, there'll be a standard journal entered directly in general ledger, and these are the allocation journals that are produced by the mass allocation feature. Okay, now we've been talking just on slides. Let us actually go to Oracle. And see the mass allocation feature. Let me now. So to see the screen where we define mass allocation, the navigation is journals define allocation. This is the window, but first launches when you follow that navigation. So let's go back to our slides first. So to define the mass allocation formula, this is the structure. So there's a batch, and we know in GL, a batch contains one or more journals. So under the batch, when you're defining what we can say maybe is the template that contains the mass allocation formula, you can enter multiple formulae, and each formula will produce mass allocation journals. Okay, so that is the structure. So what does that look like in the system? So when we follow that navigation that I just showed you, you come to this window. Here you define your batch, you enter the description for your batch name, and then under formulas is where you define the formula that will produce each mass allocation, each group of mass allocation, each batch of mass allocation journals. Okay. So I just wanted to show you the window so that you can be familiar with it, and we will cover how to enter the formula so that we can generate mass allocation journals. Let's go back to our slides. Okay, so we have seen the structure. Now, remember when I was explaining the feature of mass allocation, I asked how would you divide those costs. In our example, we used the cost for the meals. How would you divide? What formula would you use to divide those costs among between the departments? And we say that you divide the total cost by the total number of employees, and then you multiply that cost for a single employee by the number of employees in each department. So that mathematical way that we did that distribution is the same way this mass allocation feature works to divide or to distribute those costs or revenues, if they are revenues, among the different entities, whether it's departments or projects or products. However, the technical terms that we use for those various amounts that we have used to, that we have talked about, these are the technical terms that we use to refer to them when we're using this mass allocation feature. Now, for example, the total cost for the breakfast that Maskani is buying for its employees, which was $900. All right. This total cost here is what we can call the cost pool. Okay. So it can be that total cost, or another way to think about is we think about it as a balance in an account. Okay, that is our cost pool. That is the total amount that we want to distribute among the departments. All right. So that 900, you divide it by the total number of employees to find the cost for each employee. So 900 divided by the number of 90, the total number of employees, which is 90. Okay, so that 90 in this mass allocation feature, we call it the total usage. All right. So we divide the cost pool by the total usage. All right. And then the number of employees in each department is the usage factor. So you multiply 900 divided by 90, which is the cost per employee, times the usage factor, which is the number of employees in each department. So those are the technical terms, and that is how they relate in this mathematical formula that we use to find the cost for each department. And that is the same way that is the same logic that Oracle uses to generate the mass allocation journals. So now I already showed you the window, and in our next lesson we are going to see where each of those amounts, the cost pool, the usage factor, the total usage, where they go on this window where we define the formula. And then we are going to discuss two extra concepts that are fundamental to the mass allocation formula, which is the target and the offset. However, now you have understood what the mass allocation feature is and how it distributes, how we can use it to distribute revenues or expenses among various entities such as departments or projects or products. So in our next lesson, we are going to continue from there. And unless Bob, you have something to add, I think that's a good place to end our lesson today.
I think we are good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.